So first of all, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. And why don't we start just by you giving us a bit of your background, what you do, and who you are.
I'm a freelance investigative journalist. I have a master's in molecular biology from the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary. I was a freelance medical journalist for 22 years. Then in 2016, I pivoted to become a freelance investigative journalist, and I'm also an activist and completely independent. I don't ask for people for money for my website. I don't get paid for my articles. So I just live on my own, for my own investments, my savings. Yeah. And I started, I guess, writing about COVID when COVID started. I wrote something on my blog. Then I started having articles in Off Guardian and other places, and then I started writing them on for my own website, and then I've reposted elsewhere. I could say what my website is. It's just rosemaryfrei.ca.
Cool, perfect. So I first actually came across your articles back in February. I think it was the one about the conflicts of interest with the modelers, the Imperial College people, Niall Ferguson, John Edmonds. But we might touch on that later. But today we're here to talk about an article you wrote, as you mentioned, right at the start of this whole mess, basically, the 7 steps from pandemic to totalitarianism, where you detailed pretty accurately all the mechanisms by which governments worldwide, international institutions, the private sectors, the foundations, and all these different actors basically forced the world into lockdowns and facilitated the emergence of what I and many others will call the biosecurity state, or something along those lines. And aside from that, you also made a number of very accurate and astounding predictions. Like you talked about the push for vaccines. And just to remind everyone, this was back in April when all of this was basically kicking off.
Last year, in 2020.
Yeah, in 2020. Yeah, you talked about the virus mutation narrative and how this might be used to justify the production of other boosters for these vaccines. And of course, you talked about the implementation of vaccine passports. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was, when did you first sense that something was off about all of this?
Right at the beginning. I wrote a long article for my blog, Nico, late-ish March last year, when something in my gut was telling me something was wrong. So I spent an intensive week just trying to look at everything that had happened and documenting step by step what had happened, at least in Canada and the different provinces here, and just obviously had been coordinated. So,
yeah, it seemed obvious to you right from there and then. It was all
it's not exactly coincidental that places around the world would do similar things as to what we're doing here.
Yeah,
on very thin basis.
Yeah. So how do you feel about those predictions now from April 2020 to June 2021? They played out.
What do you mean? How do I feel?
It's incredible because you have comments on your article on Off Guardian, comments later, like in October even, saying how this was crazy that you would say these things. And here we are.
I think what happened is I find that when I walk, I can sometimes, it was a puzzle to put together. And when I find walking somehow and by myself just to go, what is going on? What are they doing? It's harder now, a year plus later, because there's so many different parameters, so many things going on.
Yeah, it's very multi-layered. It's hard to get.
Then it was like, okay, it seemed pretty straightforward. Here are the 7 steps. I got a few things wrong. I don't think I thought of the variants.
Yeah, of course.
But it was, it seemed like fairly clear what was happening. And then I said at the end that they were going to be having a permanent totalitarianism controlled by global companies and 24/7 invasive surveillance police state.
Yeah, and smart tech. Yeah, which is precisely, I think, what's happening with this paradigm shift. And honestly,
and then they'll give us a massive administration of antivirals and booster shots every few months.
Yeah, and do you think that is more about the actual what is in these injections, or is it more about like the digital passes that come along with that? Like, what concerns you more, the actual impacts of these vaccines?
Why don't you tell me?
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do you think is more concerning?
I think The latter, the digital aspect.
Right.
Because I've heard many theories about nefarious plans to depopulate and all that. And I do think there are people like at the top that believe in these things. There's too many people and all that. I was actually reading an article on physician-assisted suicide or death, physician-assisted death. And there's a scandal brewing up here in the UK actually about a drug called midazolam, which is one of these end-of-life drugs that is brewing up now, and how the prescriptions for that doubled last year in April. Do you think these are related? Like this?
Well, that ties in, if you saw my article from last April or was it June, talking about the long-term care home deaths and how it was actually state-sanctioned euthanasia.
Yeah.
I thought that for the most part they were using morphine, but clearly they're also using midazolam. I have seen documentation. So yeah, that was pretty clear. They had several things because it benefits the state to have fewer older people. They're expensive to treat. They're also expensive. Like the last few years or months of your life are your most expensive to the state. And also pensions are expensive, whether government pensions or corporate pensions. There's many reasons to want to have fewer old people. So I talk about how there are 3 sets of conditions, one of which was a very that allowed this euthanasia to happen. One of it was a very broad definition of COVID, and then saying if one person in a facility has the sniffles, for example, then the whole facility is designated to be in lock-in to have an outbreak, and anybody else who gets the sniffles then must have COVID, and they have to be given palliative care because it's deadly in old people. The other set is triaging guidelines that say that old people should not be allowed to go to hospital for treatment. They shouldn't be transferred from care homes to a hospital. And the third set is that they got rid of the bodies really quickly, at least here in Canada. Maybe it was a little unusual here. Or in Ontario, the chief coroner for Ontario changed the rules virtually overnight with the organization that disposes of bodies, that deals with bodies, that deals with cremation and funerals and burial. And the bodies have to be removed really quickly from long-term care homes and cremated as soon as possible. So that removes any, and of course there was the prohibition on autopsies. And so that removes the ability to actually see what happened to the people and how they died. So it's perfect. You just need one bad actor in let's say a dozen homes in each jurisdiction, and you can kill lots and lots of, you can have lots of older people who are, their caregivers are just following the letter of the law. And if there's an outbreak, then everybody has to just, there's nothing we can do for them. We just give them the shot and let them die peacefully. And then you have, rules that you can't examine the bodies, and it's easy to get an outbreak because you have to have just one person with sniffles or a cough.
So do you think that this, I guess you could call it really like a war against not just the elderly, but the weaker, I guess you could say, people in society, whether they're handicapped or they have psychological problems. Do you think that this is an integral part of this paradigm shift that we're arguably already going through, basically, this towards biosecurity? Do you think that this thing necessitates there's talks of like eugenics and how that got rebranding into bioethics and all these things that are now, in vogue in the scientific community. So do you think that this is an integral part, this war against?
Well, everything you've read and everything I've read seems to indicate that it's everywhere, that messaging about it's a war. They want to, they don't mind having a lot of people getting sick and dying from the vaccines and from all the other conditions, all the people that have gotten sick and died from losing their jobs or not being able to see their friends, or from alcoholism, or from all these other things that have happened to tens or hundreds of millions of people because of the lockdowns. So it's pretty clear a war. There's a multi-pronged war against the vast majority of the population in every country.
Yeah. And when you look at the big picture really of this, do you see it primarily like from I don't know, like a financial point of view? Like, we've gotten to this point where arguably we do need a reset. It's just a matter of whether the people implementing it are really the ones that got us here, arguably, to begin with.
Right.
But do you see it from like a financial point of view? Do you see it from like an ideological lens?
Again, it's everything, Nico. I mean, maybe you need to ask me more specific questions about a particular paper or article, but I mean, it's everything. A lot of people are writing about that.
Yeah. Okay, and it's just that different people take very different stances on what's happening. Some people still see it from like a very geopolitical, like US versus China perspective, whereas really what seems to be happening is almost like at a higher level, like a transnational cabal, if you want to call it that. There's
I don't see how it could just be seen as just US against China, because there's also the UK is heavily involved.
Yeah.
Right, heavily involved. Yeah, that's an axis of evil for sure. I think the whole the role of China is very I can't figure it out. And there's so many writers who are so hidden, have so many hidden biases about towards China or towards the US that I don't know how you figure that one out in terms of you have to. It's just, I don't know. They're both problematic. That's the easiest way to put it.
Okay. So, let me try to go a bit more specific. So, of course, as we said, that this is very multifaceted. There's many layers of this. It's hard to understand, even for us to research this stuff. So, but if you had to talk to someone who had only recently started to ask questions, so let's say someone who had gone along with the narrative until now, pretty much, and now started to see some things, oh, I got my vaccine, but I still can't go on holidays. So if you had to talk to someone like that, in which direction would you point them to help them see that what is being perpetrated is effectively a scam? Like, what is for you, like, some of the clearest, most glaring evidence that what is happening just isn't right?
Well, if you look at the fact that the vaccines are very experimental and unprecedented, and yet we're being told that they're very high, safe and effective. And every time there's some signal that there's really bad, serious adverse events, they just kind of wave it off as not problematic. And I don't know, where do we start? That's obvious, the number, and I don't know. You just need to educate people here, tell them here's 10 articles to read. I don't think you can just point to one thing. And if people can't figure out that governments are lying to us and the media is lying to us, what can you say to them I mean, that's a big hill for people to climb, to be able to figure this need to educate themselves. If they've been unwilling and unable to do it, we can't just on one foot get them to open their eyes.
Yeah. How concerned should we be about one of the main justifications?
I mean, because I do agree with the thing, we're a certain amount of wasting our time if we're just going to try one by one to tell people it's a scam. If they haven't figured it out by now, and if they're not able to stop watching MSNBC or reading The Guardian or CBC or BBC or on and on, then you know what? Sorry, I mean, I'm sorry, I have empathy for them, but people have to kind of try to
turn on their brains a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how concerned should we be for one of the main justifications right now, which you also mentioned in your article from last year about these variants? Because really it seems to be that's going to be one of the main things that's going to keep this emergency state going. And there's literally, I'm pretty sure they came up with a Mexican one. It almost feels pointless.
What's it about the Mexican one?
Yeah, they came out. I saw an article yesterday, I think, here in the UK. They found out a new Mexican variant, and then there was a Thai one. It's like you get lost in all these different names. Then they started calling it Delta instead of the country. And so, really, how concerned should we be about these? And if at all?
I know what I should do. I'll send you, maybe you can put a link under your video, and I'm going to include a link to it in my new article coming out hopefully very soon. That the idea, I think, is just to have, I don't think they're going to continue. From this article, there was a presentation given by Moderna to investors in April, and it was written up by Bloomberg and others. And it's a presentation by the CEO of Moderna and other executives and heads of vaccine development at Moderna talking about the plan. And I looked at it last night, and it looks like the plan is just to have, every year, like the flu shot, just to have a new form of the vaccine for whatever variant is most predominant in the population in where you're living. So I don't think they're really planning to have keep the state of emergency, but what they're doing is the mRNA vaccine for COVID will soon be, there'll be 30 of them, and they're going to hope to package a whole bunch of them into one vaccine each. So we're going to have them for HIV, we're going to have them for cytomegalovirus, for other respiratory viruses, for cancer. There's going to have because it's so clearly proven that the mRNA vaccines are so safe and effective that it's great. What a great model that we can just use these types of mRNA vaccines for everything. And isn't it really nice for the companies that so-called, these aren't vaccines obviously, but these so-called vaccines don't have the manufacturers don't have any liability for any harm or death they cause. So I think that's the way it's going to go, is mRNA vaccines. And there'll be lots of other treatments. There'll be antivirals, because so many people now believe that these viruses are real and they're dangerous, and that our own immune systems don't work. So we need to get all these vaccines and antivirals. So what a fabulous business model they have.
Yeah, it ticks all the boxes.
Huge captive audience. It's very lucrative too, and they have no liability. I mean, that's
a cherry on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the first things I try to tell people without getting, when we're talking about these vaccines, without getting into the whole, oh, they're experimental, because even though it's true, people are just seemingly just turned off when they hear that it's experimental and they're pro-vaccine. They're just like, oh, that's a lie. They've been used before. They've been tested and everything. But one of the things I tell them is, look, these companies are not liable if something goes wrong. So that surely should be a red flag, a massive one. But no, people just, I think so many people are just under a spell of some sort. It's incredible. And what else did I? Yeah, so I asked you about the variants. So you think, so this is an article you said you're gonna publish soon, right? About where you're gonna talk about.
I've been working on it for weeks and weeks. It's about the parallels between HIV/AIDS and the novel coronavirus and COVID. And I was going to use material that's quite old from Peter Duesberg's 1996 book and books by John Lauritsen, also from a few years ago, which I'm going to certainly quote from them. But I think it's important to look at what's happening now. And we just had the so-called 40th anniversary of the first AIDS patients. And they're saying, well, this means that now, since we've done such a great job on the COVID vaccines, we're going to, do right by all those HIV positive people and have a vaccine for them. So I'm looking at what's happening with vaccine development and all the who some of the key players are, besides Fauci and Neil Ferguson and people like that, the key players that overlap between the COVID worlds and the HIV worlds. And we can see pretty clearly that the whole HIV apparatus, which is all based on bogus, the virus has never been properly detected or isolated. There's never been proof that's infectious or that causes AIDS. It's caused probably by AZT and by the drugs that say gay men were taking in great quantities in the 80s and 90s. It was just, they needed, a virus is great for the CDC and NIH because then they can bring out all these, in the public health, they can bring out all these measures to control it. Whereas a disease caused by drugs, that doesn't make you any money. You can't really make a lot of jobs out of it. So they grew up this humongous, and of course it gives tons of money to drug companies. They grew up this humongous, very large bureaucratic structure with lots of funding. So you get all these scientists, and now they're hungry for, it's a big monster they've created. So now they've turned this monster toward COVID while keeping on with the HIV work. So it's just growing and growing, and we're one big market for everybody. And they want to test everybody in the world for HIV. And if you test positive, then we need to give you antivirals, or I guess vaccine. And yes, so there are strong parallels between HIV and between the novel coronavirus, and there's very strong parallels or complementing of what's happening with COVID and it's about to happen with HIV.
And I'm not very familiar with the HIV discussion, but I do, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, but Kerry Mullis also had similar beliefs about the HIV and how strange, I really have not looked into this, but the fact that he died a year before all of this, do you think there's anything there?
He died just a few months. I don't know. I haven't looked into it. We don't know, have any proof.
But it's just very...
He spoke very well. He spoke eloquently and passionately and very scientifically about no proof for HIV being real and the PCR being a bogus tool to use. And he wrote the introduction to Peter Duesberg's 1996 book as well. And if you read his autobiography, Dancing Naked in the Minefield, he talks about this as well. So yes, he would have been an amazing person to have on board. But fortunately, there are other people in the ranks who have stepped up, and we have some very prominent people who have. But anyway, but you have to also have more than a grain of salt with anybody who makes an opinion, who gives an opinion on anything. You have to follow the money. Unfortunately, there are many, many people on both sides of the COVID divide who are lying to us. So that makes it very problematic because it's a huge task to figure out for each person whether what they're saying is true. And the vast majority of people, as Mullis has said, are not able to discriminate between which scientists are telling the truth and which are lying. So I've kind of tried to make it my job a little bit to somebody's got to do it. And it's a pretty thankless task to some extent, and you certainly don't make a lot of friends doing it.
Yeah.
But to say which people on our side also are contributing to the misinformation and the lies, because that's a real problem. If we really want to get to the truth and find solutions to what's going on, if we spend our time being led down blind alleys, and there's lots of them, it's really a problem. So misinformation on our side is as or more of a problem than misinformation on the other side, because it makes us like cattle to be herded in whatever direction. Unfortunately, some significant actors on our side seem to be herding us towards this, moving us towards this, wanting to move large numbers of people towards the same objective, just more medicalization of whether it's vaccines or other so-called treatments. People are so hard to get them to, on our side, it's the same thing. People are so hard to get them to think independently, extremely hard. And people are pissed off at me saying, well, you went after Del Bigtree or RFK Jr. or who was the latest one, Christiane Northrup and Larry Pulaski. And people are pissed off, and I've given them a guide to say, here's, my last article was on 3 tips for telling whether a medical paper is legit or bullshit. Just 3 tips. You can look at whether there's any important, huge information missing from the article. You can, besides of course following the money, you can look at any important information missing from the article. Are they just doing studies in a petri dish or a test tube or in animals rather than looking at death and illness in humans? And also, do the papers that people link to support them, they actually support what the people are saying? And I give the example of this so-called phenomenon of spike protein shedding. And I look at the sources that people quote, and they either completely misconstrue them, like really misquote them, obviously deliberately, because they misquote them so badly. They're either really, really, really poor at their reading anything, or they're deliberately misleading us. Or the sources, so either they completely misconstrue them, or they don't say anything about what they say they're saying. And so those aren't really hard things to do, but people are, even the person who kind of inspired me to write the article, she said, great article, Rosemary, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to look to tell whether a paper is legitimate. And it's helped by a lot of that attitude is certainly fostered by a lot of people on our side who are going to do interviews or say things. And do they actually give sources at the bottom for their material, for even their one key point? They don't. So it certainly discourages people. It doesn't encourage people to try to check sources. And we have such an anti-intellectual society anyway, so it's just more of the same.
It's true, and you are in a really difficult and, as you said, thankless almost position, because you ultimately want to get to the truth. And it's something I've noticed in myself. You just question less people, as you said. It's hard, even for me, it's hard to say our side, because what does that really even mean? But it is, I feel it in myself. Like sometimes, and I try my best to do it, to actually question, but you do feel like sometimes you don't need to question as much because someone agrees with your preconceptions and all that. And it really is, I agree, a difficult task to be completely honest with yourself and with whoever your audience is. And so is there anything that particularly concerns you in terms of, we don't really need to get into the actual actors that you think are perpetrating lies on our side or whatever that means, but is it perhaps like the spike protein shedding thing, something that is really pervasive and that you completely disagree with? Or are there other currents of thought that you think are infiltrating, or I don't know what word you want to use, that concern you, that we should really stay away from? Or
I think the biggest problem is that there are people that are just completely their own agendas, and that's the biggest problem. Is people, do they go to primary sources for information? No, they say, oh, I watch X, Y, or Z's weekly show. That's how I get information. And that is hugely problematic. People need to be able to just look at the original sources, where there's a lot of research to be done and things to be looked at. And a lot of people could be doing that if they weren't spending so much time just watching people tell them what to think on either side.
Yeah.
And that's to me, that's a shame. And it's partly because now everything's on video. People, goodness, we all are more likely to watch a video, especially a short video, than read an article. Never mind, read a book. So that's so watching videos and having so many different organizations with their version of the truth is that just completely takes people away from actually looking into things for themselves. And also a problem, what was I going to say? Yeah, people are not willing to do their own research. That's, yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah, it is. So one of the last things I want to ask you, so we kind of touched on this already when I asked you about the variants and stuff. So you made some pretty accurate predictions last year. And how do you see the next year playing out, especially for those of us who are more aware, because ultimately you can't be completely aware, as we said, of what's happening, especially with regards to vaccination. And I'm sure in Canada, you must be feeling some kind of pressure now in terms of what's happening. So how do you see the next year playing out?
I don't know. Somebody was telling me that her sister in Israel, she told me this a few days ago, hasn't been vaccinated, but it's fine. Now in Israel, they don't have the green pass anymore, which was saying that only vaccinated people can go into certain venues.
That was an interesting turn of events there, yeah.
So now everything's fine. They don't ask her questions. She goes into buildings. There's no questions about that. So I think, so that's hopeful. Will it be the same everywhere? Possibly. They just want to get the vast majority of the population on board with how great vaccines are, then they'll continue to roll out. And I do think that the financial stuff now will start to eclipse, now that they've gotten us, most people, to agree to be compliant with all the medical stuff. I think somebody just told me, and I'd have to look at I have to see it myself, but in Belgium, now they are going to, she told me that now everybody has to use, instead of a credit card, it has to be a debit card, and also that all text messages will be read by the state, all of them, which is probably happening already, but, so
official.
that, yeah, because you're right, at the beginning you were talking about how there's the financial stuff, and the whole thing, everything has to be online, every transaction is trackable. God forbid we should use cash. Cash, of course, is important, but we certainly don't see articles in the paper about how important it is to keep cash, how much autonomy that gives us, and freedom, and not being tracked. So I think the financial stuff, there's so many things coming at us. So
it's hard,
they've
yeah.
distracted us with the COVID stuff. So do I want to spend my time trying to persuade people that they have to look into this protein and see it's not true? Not really. It feels like a waste of all of our time to be distracted by these. They're just getting us into these
smaller debates within a larger picture, basically. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Oh, but yeah, as you said, it was in many ways easier to predict back in April of last year what was going to happen this year, because now there's so many ways this could play out, from the financial damage that we're going to start to feel soon, because there's really, like, they've just been printing money basically to keep this all to keep the people happy in a way, but soon we're going to start feeling it. So who knows how that will actually play out. But
who do you think the debtor is? Is it really the IMF or the World Bank that's been, apparently we saw that the report from Belarus, was it last year, that the head of Belarus spoke out? And was it the World Bank or the IMF that he was going to get money from if he'd agreed to all the lockdown measures?
That was with Belarus. I think it was the IMF. I might be mistaken. I'm pretty sure it was with the president. They basically almost bribed him, but he said no. I think it was.
So that's a question in every jurisdiction. I'm sure in Scotland, certain here in Ontario and Canada, they're spending so much money. There's a huge flood of money coming from the government for every little program. So the question, where is that money coming from? Is it going to be, is it then from the IMF? They're not telling us that. And then if so, will they all of a sudden just say, well, as I predicted in my article, they're going to say, well, you have to sell all your public assets to.
That would be the transfer, basically. Yeah.
Is that what's going to happen? I don't know. Or is it that, but we don't know where that money is coming from. So.
Yeah. And there's on that regard, we don't know, but again, there's so many ways this could play out. There's talks of cyber attacks. If you look at the parallel between Event 201, which happened a couple of months before, and also other tabletop exercises of the same kind. And now the World Economic Forum is doing, I don't know if you've heard about Cyber Polygon.
Yeah.
These simulations of cyber attack, and you have Klaus Schwab talking about, oh, we're not ready for a cyber pandemic. So that could be, I think, another direction things could go, which could be another justification to just take down the whole system and renew it or reset it, as they say. And so who knows? But Yeah, many things, many layers.
And
as
what are
you
you
said.
studying, and what do you do? Do you write as well, or how do you kind of descend?
Yeah, I'm trying to write more. I'm mainly so I graduated last year from Edinburgh University in social policy and politics. I thought I was gonna just get into the working world. I almost got into the financial world. I applied for Lloyd's Bank. I don't know if you know.
Wow.
And but that's right at the end of my degree. But I had been questioning other stuff for a few years, mostly on the political side of things, left and right. But then really last year, when I started getting into finance and learning about banks and banking system, I started to question things from that side, which is where I came in from, the sort of big picture of financial analysis and how we've been building so much debt in governments and just the whole monetary system and all that. But I always loved writing. So I like even like fiction and short stories and stuff. But like really since last year, I've started this website, The Crossroads, where I talk about what's happening. And then I started the podcast in January of this year. And it's going quite well. So I'm trying to be kind of like you. I'm trying to be as independent as I can and not depend on the system, basically. I'm trying to survive in that sense. And honestly, I'm not making a lot of money, but I'm kind of happy doing the things I'm doing. So hopefully I can sustain that. And
I'll look at your website and
I wrote a fairly long article about this paradigm shift towards biosecurity. That's my last writing back in like mid-April, but I do want to write more because I'm decent at it. And so to do the podcast and more articles though, because I'm bad at managing my time. That's my main issue I need to overcome. And
it's really hard.
It is.
I haven't written an article for 3 weeks. I've been really busy researching things, but it's I don't know how
people do it. But I think it has to be discipline based. I think I'm not very.
I don't know, but we say like Corbett, and I can send you stuff about Corbett. He probably has a big team behind him, and not necessarily on our side that are helping him. So I don't think we can necessarily I don't think I'll send you that. It's quite enlightening.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I know he has a video editor somewhere, but I did not know.
Yeah, but I mean, to pump out like a documentary, so many documentaries and so prolific. And somebody talked specifically about Flight 77, and he gives talks. He talks about the plane, Flight 77, hitting the Pentagon. Well, there was no plane that hit the Pentagon. There would have been debris on the Pentagon lawn. There's so much evidence it's not true. So I'll send it to you. He probably is a very, very cleverly controlled opposition.
Interesting.
He covers a lot of things very well, but he's there to also,
I mean, this is very disheartening.
I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry.
But no, it'll be interesting. Again, we have to be open to all sorts of possibilities, I think. And again, question, and it's something you say yourself. Question me.
Who did I'll tell you who wrote this blogs that I'm talking about. I just emailed somebody about them. Anyway, I will send it to you.
Don't worry.
Incredible to me.
So, okay. So
maybe he's a CIA like operative if he's a very, very smart guy.
Yeah, for sure.
But this stuff about 9/11 is irrefutable. Here he is saying time and time again in one talk, like 11 times, that the plane flew into the Pentagon.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look into it again. Primary sources is all we need.
Yes, good. Yeah.
But okay, so anyway, I think it's been about 48 minutes. So
Great.
It's thank you so much again. So you have this new article coming up. Anything else? You gave us your website, rosemaryfrei.ca, right?
Yeah, that's F as in Frank, REI, .ca. And sorry, it started off a bit roughly. I just thought you might ask me some more targeted questions, but we got there. It's all good.
No, don't worry about it. And anything else you have coming up? Any projects?
Oh, there's so much. But my list of articles I'm working on. I don't know, because every day there's just things you hear about.
Yeah.
Well,
it's fine. No worry if you have. I'll just.
Then when I write something, I try to make it really almost definitive.
Yeah.
Like this thing on HIV/AIDS is taking me a long time because I'm going, okay, what's the real story here?
Yeah.
And I want to make it topical, not stuff from just 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So it takes a long time.
Anyway, thank you so much. And have a great rest of your day. And hopefully we can do this again in the future, see how things play out. Yeah. Thank you.
And good luck on your end. And send me a link to your latest article on your Crossroads.
I will.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Take care.
See you.
Bye-bye.